So what I'm going to do today is to explain a very important term that Klaus Schwab uses quite a lot. And that term is stakeholder capitalism. Now, what I've noticed is that no one really ever pins down exactly what this term actually means. And many of the people that have tried to define it have ended up making a fairly imprecise job. And what I'm going to do today is to really pin this down and explain it as simply as possible to you. So the first question is, what exactly is a stakeholder? And my definition would be a stakeholder is anybody who has an interest in an organization. So it could be anything. It could be a local resident, that they would have an interest in a business's activities because they might be affected by noise pollution, or they might chuck the waste products into the local river. So another stakeholder group would be the employees, the workers of the business. Obviously, they've got an interest in the business's performance, how much profit the business makes, because obviously that might have an impact on whether they get wage increases or not, their job security. So that's another obvious stakeholder group is the workforce. Another stakeholder group would be the suppliers, so other companies that sell the business that we're looking at, their raw materials and components. Obviously, the suppliers are a stakeholder group because their livelihoods depends on the ongoing success of the business that they supply. So quite clearly, they are a stakeholder group. Another group is the shareholders, and the shareholders are the owners of the business. So what are shareholders interested in? Well, two things. They're interested in the dividends that they get, and the dividends is an annual share of the business's profits. So obviously, the better the business does, in all probability, the more dividends the shareholders will receive. The other factor is just the security of their investment. So if the business was to perform very badly and go bust, the shares would fall to, the market price of them would fall to zero, they'd be worthless, and the shareholder would lose their investment. So shareholders, they have financial skin in the game. And they're a stakeholder group because it's obvious why they're going to be interested in the activities of this organization that they're shareholders of. The last stakeholder group is the consumers. So the consumers of the business that we're looking at. So if you think about a train company, the consumers of the people that buy the tickets from that train company, they've got an interest in, like, are they being ripped off? Are the prices high? What's the quality of service like? Are the trains punctual? So consumers are definitely a stakeholder group because they have a direct interest in the activities of this business that they're stakeholders of. So where did this idea of stakeholder capitalism come from? Well, it was a term that was first coined in 1984 by an American academic called Edward Freeman. And it's also taught in the A-level business and management course. And I certainly remember Peter Drucker, quite a famous management guru, talking about stakeholder capitalism. So we've talked about who the stakeholders are, but what exactly does stakeholder capitalism actually mean? Well, all firms are run by a management team that's put into power by the shareholders. Now, so the thing to get your head around here is that companies are run by professional management teams. And in many cases, those management teams are not the main shareholders. So there's like a divorce between ownership and control. The business is owned by the shareholders who appoint professional managers to run their business on their behalf. Now, what stakeholder capitalism puts forward as an idea is that the professional managers who run the company should consider the interests of all stakeholder groups when making their decisions, rather than basing their decisions purely on what's best for the shareholder. So like one more time, because this is like reasonably complicated. So businesses are owned by their shareholders, but in the main, they appoint professional managers to run the business on their behalf. And the idea of stakeholder capitalism is that the professional managers shouldn't just consider what's best for the shareholders, they should also consider what's in the interests of local residents, what's in the interests of the workforce, what's in the interests of local suppliers, what's in the interests of consumers and shareholders. So more of a global picture, really. Managers should consider all stakeholder groups rather than just focusing solely on what the shareholder wants. Now, for me, I was always very skeptical of this idea of stakeholder capitalism, because I thought it's a bit ignorant in a way. Yeah, of course, shareholders want their companies to make profit, so that the share price goes up and they get good dividends. But only a complete dullard as a shareholder would realise that the managers have to think very carefully about other stakeholder groups. So, for example, if you think about the workforce, if you had a group of managers who pushed the workforce extremely hard, what would happen? Well, basically, you would end up losing your best staff. You know, if you treat your staff terribly, underpay them, horrible working conditions, then what will happen is that your best staff will leave. They'll go and get better paid jobs with better working conditions with your rivals. So it would be a really dumb idea for a manager to pursue short-run profit maximization by trashing working conditions and skimping on wages, because in the long run, that's going to reduce your profits, because your best employees are going to walk, and that's going to impair the ability of your firm that you own to make profit for you. So, you know, in practice, it makes sense for managers to also consider their employees. Similarly, you could look at consumers. This is again where I think a lot of people have been indoctrinated in Marxism, and they just see evil capitalists, they'll always exploit their consumer. And this is just nonsense, because if you exploit your consumer by charging rip-off prices or by compromising on product quality to reduce your raw material costs, again, you're going to lose market share. Your customers are going to notice, and they're going to gravitate away from you towards your rivals who offer them lower prices and a better quality product. So in the long run, it makes sense for shareholders to kind of support their management teams in trying to offer their customers the best possible deal, because that's the best way of maximizing your long run profit. I'll give you a great example of a situation where a firm's failing. So if you think about the UK brewed version of Stella Artois, that basically what's happened here is that this brand is in terminal decline, along with other ones like Foster's, because the management group have cheapened the product, and what they're charging represents very poor value for money. So there are other brands of beer available. So surprise, surprise, if you try to maximize your short-run profit by watering down your beer, that will be at the expense of your long-run profit. And this is what's happening. Both of these brands are in long-term decline, and probably within 5 or 10 years, these brands won't even be sold anymore. On the other hand, if you look at other businesses like Budweiser, Budvar, or Pilsner Urquell from the Czech Republic, or Beck's Beer from Germany, or any of these Bavarian producers, what they realize is that the customer is a very, very, you could say, the most important stakeholder group of them all. Like if you get customer satisfaction right, if you get the price right, then you'll have a loyal cohort of consumers. And that is the way that you make maximum profit in the long run. Another example would be maybe somebody who runs a double glazing business. A foolish manager would try to short run profit maximize by making false claims about their product, by massively overpricing it. But by doing that, you're going to develop a terrible reputation locally. And as a consequence of that, you'll be out of business. So tactics, if you try to put the shareholder first immediately, all the time, and maximize short-run profit, you won't be around in the long run. So, you can argue that this kind of stakeholder capitalism, it's sort of, good firms have been doing this for a very long time anyway. And it's basically the difference between, are you going to try and maximize short-run profit, or are you going to maximize long-run profit? So you might be thinking after watching this, it's like, well, yeah, so what, Nigel? What's this got to do with Klaus Schwab? Well, I'll tell you what it's got to do with Klaus Schwab. He is misusing this term of stakeholder capitalism. What stakeholder capitalism means to Klaus Schwab is that private businesses must only have one stakeholder going forward, and that is the government. And it's the government that regulates private businesses. So Klaus would say, well, the worker's very, very important. So the government must pass regulations that private companies must obey about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's the government that's, through regulation, deciding what's in the best interest for employees. Similarly, you could look at the consumer. In Klaus's case, yeah, the consumer is an important stakeholder group, but Klaus believes that me and you are too stupid to know what's best for us. So what Klaus is going to do is pass regulations that about the quality of products, or the way that they're made, or whether they're environmentally friendly or not, or how many of them we're allowed to have. That's Klaus's version of stakeholder capitalism. So Klaus's stakeholder capitalism is really it's a deliberate misnomer. It's like referring to a Linda McCartney vegan sausage as the real thing. It's not. What Klaus Schwab's version of stakeholder capitalism really is corporatism. So this was the type of economy that was run by the German government in the 1930s. Stakeholder capitalism should really be called corporatism, which is the union of state with corporate power. So under the German National Socialist government of the 1930s, private businesses were allowed to exist, but they had to follow extensive state regulation of how they treated their employees, what type of product they produced for their consumers, rules and regulations about where they could get their supplies from. The Germans, they adopted this policy of autarky, that's it, where, it was only local suppliers that could be used, no foreign imports. So what I believe is, I think the best way to call it is shareholder capitalism, but to understand that in shareholder capitalism, the most important stakeholder group is always the consumer. It's the consumer that decides the size of a business in the long run. It's the consumer that decides the profitability of a business. It's the consumer in a free society that decides what type of product is going to be supplied to the market. And firms that produce expensive stuff that consumers don't want go out of business, and the resources are then released back into the economy to be taken up by a new group of entrepreneurs who want to try to produce a product that consumers do want to buy. And in a free society, we decide what we want to buy. We're not told what we can and can't buy via government technocrats. What Klaus wants, his stakeholder capitalism, his corporatism, and under corporatism, Klaus tells us what we can and can't buy. Klaus tells firms what they can and can't do. So my system's based on freedom. Klaus's stakeholder capitalism is based on us just being obedient slaves and doing what we're told to do. So that's all I want to say today. So God bless.